So Biden's got, you get the family of the aides, right? So he's got Jill and Hunter, then he's got Mike Donnellan and Steve Ricchetti, Bruce Reed, and Anita Dunn. Those are, but you have your Joe Gaylord, the person that's been around you forever, giving you political. Joe Gaylord comes to you one day and says, is that the kind of person in your experience that you go, you know what, if Joe says it, or do you say, you know what, Joe, I'm going to go talk to Callista instead? Like, you've been at the highest levels. Who is it that you would have respected that comes to you and says, Mr. Speaker, the jig is up, we got to go? Is it the political people, the family, the combination?
I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I think in a situation where it's literally political life and death, if you have a good relationship with your spouse, they count a lot. Nancy Reagan had huge influence over Ronnie, and nobody should be confused about that. Now, conversely, I don't think that Mamie Eisenhower had the same level. She and I had a very affectionate relationship, but they had a pretty severe distinction between his job as a general or his job as a president and their personal relationship. So I think Nixon had great affection for Pat and in many ways listened to Pat. And they endured Watergate together. I think, frankly, that the Carters were very, very much one unit. And I think that she had as much influence on Jimmy as anybody. So it partly depends. But here you've got a guy, remember also, when you get to be his age, and, for example, you're a little worried walking up and down stairs, because falling really is a significant problem at his age. The person you most rely on is Jill. Well, that creates a sense of dependency. And so she says, as the person who's closest to him, the person who protects him, she's telling him positive things. I mean, I think if she were saying to him, why don't you drop out for your legacy, that might be a different conversation. But she's telling him what he wants to hear. You're doing great. Remember that whole scene after the debate?
You answered every question, Joe.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and then, I don't know if you picked up on it, but I thought when she turns and she says, and what did Trump do? He lied. The way she yelled lied reminded me immediately of Governor Dean in Iowa in the primary.
The Dean scream, we're going to New Hampshire, we're going to Iowa, whoa!
Yeah, and she had some of that, over the top kind of, we're really positive, we're really not giving in.
I want to go back to the post-debate fallout, right? And this is where I want to tap into your expertise from a crisis communication standpoint. I felt like they acknowledged they had a bad night that night. I mean, Kamala comes on air and says, it wasn't the best night, but 3.5 years, good talking points, whatever. And then they let this time go by. Like literally, we're here at day 12 and they're still worried about members of Congress. I cannot believe, based on what you and I both agree the outcome is, that Joe Biden digs in, stays as the nominee. The idea that rank and file and even committee chairmen on the House side, on the Democratic House side, are coming out now, 12 days later. I don't get that politically. I get the day after or whatever saying, hey, I have a problem here. But why would you wait 12 days, 10 days as a rank and file member? That to me seems like, wow, you're cutting off your political future real quick.
Well, I think, first of all, my impression is that they didn't believe it was as bad as it was. So I think the first reaction of the White House was sort of what they've said. We had a bad night. And they didn't realize that, no, they didn't have a bad night. They had a cataclysmic night. They had a night that changed the perception of 100 million Americans. Second, because they didn't realize how bad it was, they didn't go to an immediate rescue operation. And it was only as the media began to pile on that and when nobody was jumping up to defending. I think part of the lag was this was so much worse than they thought possible. Their campaign manager doesn't have the kind of authority that Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita have for Trump. So they're not able to turn, and they don't have a machine. I think the Trump people could reach out and touch virtually every elected Republican within 12 hours. I think the Biden people literally weren't prepared for that kind of all-out grassroots, get them back in line, talk to them, reassure them. And so it grew out of control. Now, I think they're getting it back in control, and it's starting from their real base, which is the Black Caucus. And the fact that the Black Caucus is going to be militant, given its size in the Democratic Party, almost guarantees that an anti-Biden rebellion can't occur successfully.
So put yourself back in the shoes. They met, as I said this morning, as a caucus. Hakeem Jeffries, according to like Playbook and everyone else, was going to be in listen mode. Should he be in lead mode, right? Should he and Pelosi, as the elders and the leaders of that caucus, be saying, guys, Biden's made it clear he's going to be the nominee. No more dissension among the ranks. We're all on board on this. Or should he be? I mean, it seems like there's a lack of Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries trying to say to the flock, guys, get in line. And is that the right move or no?
Well, I've always followed a model of listen, learn, help, and lead. So I would say you walk into a room, because here's what happens. You're dealing with independently elected people. This isn't like a cabinet where you appoint them and you fire them. They're independently elected. So if you try to be a cheerleader, what you can do is you can suppress them and they'll shut up. But that doesn't mean they've changed their mind. It just means they've decided they don't want to take you on. On the other hand, if you let everybody ventilate, everybody gets to say, here's how I feel, here's how my district feels. First of all, you know that over half of them are going to say, my district wants Biden to stay. So you gradually build a growing majority. You'll have a bunch of them who are wavering, and as they see where the boat is going, they'll decide to get on it. And then you'll have a small group that really does think this is hopeless, but they also will begin to shut up because if in fact he is the inevitable nominee, and if in fact the party is going to unify around him, then it hurts their reelection to be seen as anti-Biden.
Right.
And so I think that's probably the model they're trying to work off of.
The questions about the Parkinson's and this visit from the doctor. I feel like this is the real issue that they're screwing up now, is that they need to reassure. Yes, we all know he's getting older. Everybody knows that because that's just life. The Parkinson's issue or another disease issue is where they've got to tread very carefully, because if there are concerns about some kind of debilitating disease, then they need to be out in front of this. I felt like yesterday was so just ill-managed, unprofessional on Corinne's part. She was not prepared for this, and it was in the New York Post and the New York Times. She should have come out and taken this head on. And the idea that Dr. O'Connor is putting out a letter later that day does not instill a sense of confidence in the president's medical condition.
Look, I think this is the situation where if they can get a specialist who can say with honesty, I've reviewed it. He has some limited cognitive problems, but I am confident that he can serve for the next 4 years as president and that this will not be permanently damaging. That's worth its weight in gold. Now, if in fact they can't get a doctor to say that, then this thing's never going to go away. And I think people have not yet factored in. We were shocked at how bad Biden was the night of the debate. We have not yet taken into account that the real question here is, are you willing to vote for this guy for 4 more years, given what you've seen? That's a much different issue than can he get from here to January. And I think overwhelmingly, even Democrats now, when you look at polling data, do not believe he can serve 4 years.
I don't think that this, and to your point, this is a sympathetic thing. I don't want him. Not only as I look at this as the leader of the country, the leader of the free world, but then as a human being, I don't want somebody to have to deal with that, and face it. And personally, and I cannot believe that they're going through this. He's got two big hurdles the rest of the week, the way I see this. Number one, you've got these NATO meetings, and the hurdle is not having leaks come out from leaders in their top aides saying he dozed off, he was incoherent, etc. And then secondly, what the White House themselves, unbelievably, is branding a big boy press conference. If he doesn't get through both of these with A's, do you think that Friday morning we wake up and have a different conversation about the state of this race?
Yeah, I think particularly if he has either a truly major mistake or if he melts down in the press conference. I mean, why you would take him through a major international meeting with 26 other leaders and then turn around and the next day have an hour-long press conference? That makes no sense at all. I remember years ago, Bob Novak told me a story about pacing and politicians and said that when Reagan became governor, he called Reagan's press guy and said, I'd like to come out and spend 2 or 3 days with the governor and then have a chance to really interview him in depth. And Lynn Nofziger said to him, you must think I'm crazy. You're going to get 30 minutes with me in the room. That's it. Because he understood that 2 or 3, even with a guy as brilliant as Reagan, 2 or 3 days, you'll find 5 or 6 things that make him look bad. And you shouldn't voluntarily do that. So I would say, one, I don't know why they would schedule it on Thursday.
Yeah.
Because he's probably going to be tired. I mean, and that's true of everybody. I mean, Reagan once fell asleep while talking with Pope John Paul II because it was his first trip to Europe, and they hadn't set aside enough time for Reagan to rest before the meeting. And they learned from that. Every future meeting after that had a time to recover and time to be totally fresh. Why you would take a guy who collapsed during a debate, turn around, have him do 3 heavy days. Because remember, in between each NATO meeting, he's talking to Democrats. He's saying, I can run, I can do this. And so, I mean, he is on a treadmill. Why you would do that makes no sense to me.
But let's just play this out. If he has an episode, an incident, an issue, that press conference, what's the conversation we're having Friday morning?
Well, I think you then see a renewed sense that he has to go. And again, the real issue that hasn't been joined is not can he survive to Election Day. The real issue is if he won, can you imagine the guy you're watching serve 4 years as commander-in-chief? And I think 1 or 2 more mistakes, you're going to be at 90% of the country saying no.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think it's a little hard to see how they avoid having a real rebellion to get him off the ticket.
So just to be clear, let's just play this out for fun. If he were to step aside voluntarily, do you agree that Kamala Harris will be the nominee, or do you see somebody else, the Gavin Newsom, the Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, becoming the nominee?
I don't see, given the power structure of that party, how you push aside a black female vice president. I think you'd have a civil war. And I think you would have the most loyal and most militant part of the party go crazy. So my assumption is, and this is why I wrote my piece on collapsing with Kamala, because I think that when you really look at her record and you really look, I mean, you know, she's the border czar, and she's visited the border once in 3.5 years. Just take item after item. And she is, I think, much weaker than Biden once you're in a real campaign.
I do too, but here's what I would just throw at you. I keep using the baseball analogy, right? If Biden is our batter right now, we know every stat about him. We know that he's never hit the ball when we pitch. I mean, we know we're going to win with Biden at the plate. Okay. That's how I look at this politically. Kamala gets up to bat if Biden has to, she becomes the DH. I worry that the dynamic has changed and that who knows? I mean, my point is, I get all that, the border, you name it, whatever. But suddenly, maybe she fires up black women. Maybe she fires up women in general. I don't know. But here's what I know. I don't want to deal with it. I want to deal with what I know, the knowns. And I know we can beat Biden and that he loses the House and the Senate with him. I would, and so that's why I keep saying I worry about any effort on our side to push him, because I believe that Kamala will lose. There's no question about it for all the reasons that you enumerated. However, there's X factors, and I don't like X factors.
Well, I think Donald Trump agrees with you. I mean, I think that's what he was saying on Hannity, that, he is quite happy to have Joe Biden as his opponent.
Yeah. Okay. Speaker Gingrich, I appreciate it. I know that you've got a cold, jet lag.
I apologize.
A bad night.
But luckily, I'm not running for president, and this wasn't a debate.
I know. That's a beauty. I always appreciate your historical wisdom and insight, political acumen. This is, thank you for sharing and being so generous with your time as always.
Right. Good to be with you.